Fayetteville, Arkansas, 1971. For all intents and purposes, it's a quiet college town. But on one spring night, that peace was absolutely shattered by a crime so brutal, so baffling, that more than 50 years later, it's still a complete and haunting mystery. Let's get into it. So, this is the spot. Monday, April 12th. Pauline Storment, just 26 years old, is walking home from the University of Arkansas Library. It's about 9:30 at night, and right here, just 4 blocks from campus, she was attacked. She was stabbed between 7 and 8 times, mostly in the chest and stomach. Just shocking, inhuman violence. She was found right there on the roadside, her books and a tape recorder just scattered around her. An eyewitness rushed over to help her, and he later recounted her last words. She was still conscious, and she was able to tell him she'd been followed, that a man had attacked her. She died just a few hours later at the hospital. This quote, this is the last thing we ever hear from Pauline herself. It's just a tragic, chilling start to a very, very long and cold case. Now, in the immediate aftermath, you'd think things were moving incredibly fast. Police had a suspect in custody almost right away. Seriously, it looked like this case might be solved before the sun even came up. But as you'll see, this first thread, it unraveled almost as quickly as it was pulled. Okay, check out this timeline because it is wild. On the left, you see the news breaking about the murder, but get this. Within just 45 minutes of the attack, police had a 17-year-old named Wallace Peter Kunkel in custody. They found him with what looked like blood on his clothes. Seemed like an open and shut case, right? But then, just a few days later, you see the headline on the right, Kunkel free. So, what on earth happened? Well, here's the problem. It was an absolutely incredible forensic coincidence. Remember, this is 1971. We don't have the DNA tech we have today. When the lab tested the blood on Kunkel's clothes, all they could do was determine the blood type. And as luck would have it, both Kunkel and Pauline Storment were type A positive. This made it completely impossible to prove the blood was hers. Just like that, a key piece of evidence was basically useless. Investigators even found what they thought was the murder weapon, a blood-stained butcher knife just sitting in a nearby backyard. But even this lead fizzled out. After taking a closer look, the police started to have serious doubts that it was the actual weapon used in the attack. And just like that, the first and most promising path in the whole investigation just hit a dead end. So with the first suspect released, the case started to go cold. But as the years went by, this really strange and persistent theory began to pop up from a few different places. The idea that Pauline Storment wasn't even the intended victim. So you have to wonder, right? Was it possible this brutal, seemingly random attack wasn't random at all? 2 completely different pieces of information surfaced, one just weeks after the murder, and another nearly a decade later, and they both pointed to the same bizarre possibility. First up is this document from May of '71. A guy named Jack Butler literally walks into a police station and voluntarily confesses to the whole thing. He gives a super detailed statement claiming he'd followed Pauline and stabbed her because, in the dark, he thought she was his wife. A shocking confession that should have solved the case, right? But for reasons we still don't totally understand, it never led to a conviction. Okay, now fast forward 9 years to 1980. The case takes another weird turn. The magazine Master Detective gets this anonymous letter. The writer claims Pauline was, and I quote, killed by mistake for another young woman who, quote, looked a lot like her. This mystery tip completely revived the mistaken identity theory, but it pointed the investigation in a totally new direction. And this just shows you how confusing it all was. You've got 2 different mistaken identity theories floating around. On one hand, you have a named person, Jack Butler, saying it was a crime of passion. He thought Pauline was his wife. On the other, you have an anonymous source saying it was more of a calculated hit, but the killer just got the wrong person. These 2 stories pulled the investigation in completely opposite directions and just buried the truth even deeper. All right, let's move on to our third thread. Years after the murder, a totally new lead emerged, and this one pointed away from random attacks and mistaken identities and straight toward a specific group of people, and a place known only as the Gray House. So in 1978, police get this letter from a woman named Barbara Hamilton. And she tells them about a guy named Stephen Wayne Cooper. He'd been living with her sister at this place they called the Gray House. Turns out, this house was a known spot for drug use, and witness statements later confirmed that on the night of the murder, people there were using amphetamines. Hamilton also pointed out that Cooper and his friends all skipped town shortly after the killing. And then a second letter from Hamilton came in with an even more chilling detail. She wrote that after leaving Fayetteville, Cooper had allegedly told someone about a stabbing with a big butcher knife that he'd done back in town. The description, it was disturbingly close to the attack on Pauline Storment. So what happened to Stephen Wayne Cooper? Well, just 2 years after Pauline's murder, he was arrested in Arizona for another slaying. He had stabbed a man, slashed his throat, and dumped the body. The headlines you see on the left confirm his arrest, and it creates this terrifying parallel to that violent confession mentioned in the letter on the right. And the story gets even more complicated. While he was being prosecuted in Arizona, Cooper was examined by a psychiatrist and diagnosed with schizophrenia. He was ultimately convicted of manslaughter and sent to prison. This diagnosis just adds another confusing layer to his potential involvement. Was his alleged confession some kind of delusion? Or was it the real admission of a deeply disturbed and violent person? We'll probably never know because he was never actually questioned or charged in the Storment case. An unsolved murder doesn't just sit in a cold case file. It sends these ripples of fear and doubt through an entire community. And for Fayetteville, back in 1971, the attack on Pauline Storment was a massive shock to their sense of safety. This slide really gets at the psychological toll the murder took on people. It's a letter to the editor from someone just disgusted with the so-called ear witnesses. People who later admitted they heard screams that night, but just brushed them off as party noise. It really captures this powerful sense of collective regret and the chilling thought that Pauline's cries for help just went unanswered. And the community's fear just got cranked up to 11, only a month later. In May, another young woman, Andrea Jones, was stabbed in her apartment not far from where Pauline was killed. Now, police officially said there was no connection, but the timing and the location, it created this atmosphere of intense tension. Rumors started flying about a maniac on the loose preying on university students. So, we've got forensic dead ends, we've got conflicting confessions, and we've got a really promising suspect who was never even pursued. When you put all these tangled threads together, you really start to see why this case is just frozen in time. Ultimately, this case isn't cold because there was a lack of leads. It's cold because there were too many conflicting leads, and every single one of them hit a wall. The forensics were stopped by a 1 in a million coincidence with the blood type, the confessions were just bizarre and contradictory, and arguably the most compelling suspect was already in prison for another murder before investigators here could even get to him. And with every year that passed, the trail just got colder and colder. And this official letter from the Fayetteville Chief of Police, written in 1990, it just confirms the sad reality. The homicide case of Pauline Storment remains open, and it remains unsolved. It even notes that the last real lead they had was way back in 1980, which was probably that anonymous letter. But to this day, no one has ever been brought to justice. And that really is the central question that hangs over all of this. It's this incredible puzzle of forensic bad luck, bizarre confessions, and just plain missed opportunities. It seems like every piece of evidence that should have brought some clarity only added another layer of mystery. And in the end, the brutal murder of a young student was left to become a ghost story in a quiet college town.